is Olivier Hahn. So I'm working in the HP Aruba networking POC proof of concept team. And today I'm going to present you a new features that is coming with AOS-CX 10.12, which is the SSH server allow list. In this agenda, we will cover the typical sections for this type of transfer of information. So we'll look at the overview of the features, the different use case, get more details about the features, see how it's configured, look at some best practice, and how we going to troubleshoot the features. Then we'll have a quick demo, and let's finish also with some additional resources when we can find more information about the feature. This feature, SSH Server Allow List, is about the management plane of the Aruba OS-CX switch. So it's how to restrict inbound SSH connection from an illegitimate management network. So we will we will configure some well-known management networks which are allowed to get SSH access to the AOS-CX switch. And for the rest, so for the IP address, source IP address which are not part of this official management network, SSH servers will be just denied. As a reminder, so for all AOS-CX switch, the SSH server is enabled by default on the management VRF, but you can still enable SSH servers on all the different VRF configured on the switch, so as a default VRF, which is enabled by default as well on the switch. What about the use case of this SSH server list? So we could see, yes, we have before today in 10.11 and earlier release a solution to achieve the same objectives. So it is to secure the SSH access to the switch. It was done with what we call an access control list applied to the control plane. So how to configure, how it was configured. So I am giving an example here. So a standard access list where we define the destination TCP port, which is 22 for SSH. So you need to permit and then deny what is not allowed. But in the statement 200, we need to permit everything if it's applied to the VRF default. Because this control plane access list is not only used, it's used for whole traffic, which is managed by the control plane. This traffic can be also the routing protocols like BGP, OSPF, can be such protocol like BFD, bidirectional forwarding detection, like spanning tree protocol. So a mistake, a human mistake, which might be configured, which might be made on the configuration of this access list, can have very high impact, not only on the management here of the network, but also on the operation of the network. Therefore, this SSH allow list really simplifies the configuration, and there is no rule ordering, so there is no risk of doing something wrong that could impact something else as the management plane. So this is the main purpose why this feature has been introduced. Regarding the support of the features, it's supported on every 10.12 product, supported product in the AOS-CX series. The same allow list apply to all VRF. So as we saw a bit before, it's possible to enable SSH servers on different VRF, but here you need to keep in mind it will be the same access control list for all the VRF. So there is a future deployment that will be done to distinguish, as we have on the control plane today. On the control plane access list, we can have one access list for the management VRF and another access list for the default VRF. So it will be done also this way in the futures. But in the first iteration, it's the same. The single list contains both IPv4 and IPv6 entries, so where we specify the source IPv4 IPv6 address. When we enable the feature, so we'll see the configuration steps. So there is two steps, one to define IP address, another one to enable the features. Then all the SSH servers are restarted and the existing session are terminated. But when we disable the features, we maintain the existing session, only the daemon, only the SSH daemon is restarted. Regarding the logging of the denied SSH connection, you don't need to enable to activate anything. So it's the logging is enabled by default. So I show here how it appears in the event log. So for example, if somebody tries to connect to the switch and this IP address is not allowed by the SSH server allow list, we will see that this connection is denied by SSH server allow list feature. The last point is very important. I will really want to keep to keep in mind what might happen if we go a bit too quick. So if the features is enabled but the SSH allow list is empty, so it might happen. So network administrators first type enable before entering the IP address in the SSH server allow list context, or it will delete some existing entries and without verifying that it is deleting the last entries. So if it's doing that, so we have added verification. If the access control list is empty, you will see in the message. So it has been added in 10.12 1000. So we won't see this specific warning message in 10.12.1, for example, but starting in 10.12,000, we find this message that says that the SSH allow list is empty and all the SSH session will be terminated, but also all new session will be denied. So it means that you will be kick out the management, the SSH management for these systems, but there is a remediation that I will show a bit later with the REST API. Regarding now the details of the features, so it's supporting 20 entries maximum. We have only permit statements, so no deny statements. There is a different type of syntax for this IP address, so it can be just one IPv4 address, a.b.c.d, so it's considered like a host address. So from a functional perspective, it's the same as a /32. So in the second line, we can specify a subnet max prefix length, or you can also specify a network mask with a 255 integers, for example, or you can specify also IPv6 and IPv6 subnet with the prefix length. There is just a caveat about the use of not using a prefix mask, so like 1111, and using a /32. So if we set the same entries, so with a /32 and without, it takes two entries, so two values in the 20 entries maximum list. So make sure not to do that. Also the same if we specify a subnet. If never you configure several IP addresses which are part of this subnet, like 1111/24 and 1112/24, will take 2 entries, but from a functional perspective, it's 1110/24. So this is what you need as much as possible to be cautious and to play whether with prefix mask and subnet or with /32 for host. So how it's configured? Again, first, and I really insist about that, configure the IP address, IPv4 and IPv6 address for the network, for the hosts which are going to be allowed to do a SSH connection, and then just enable. When you type enable, there is a warning message which is displayed. Do you want to continue? So if you type no, nothing happens. If you type yes, at this time, at this stage, the session will be terminated. And you need to reconnect via SSH and from a legitimate source, allowed source IP address. With the show SSH server alert list, we can see now that the feature is enabled and you can see the allowed host IP address. Now, if we want to disable the features, you enter again the context SSH server alert list and just type no enable. If we look with the show SSH server alert list command, we can see the status now is disabled and still see that the access list is not deleted as still all the entries, even if they are not enabled, they are not active. All these features is fully configurable from REST API. So there is a new in the API coming with 10.12. There is a new attribute which is called SSH server allow list enable. This attribute can have two values, so it's a Boolean attribute, can be true or false. So if it's true, it's enabled. If it's false, it's disabled. So here with the get command, you can collect the status of the features activation. Now let's figure out, as I said, that network administrator made a mistake, enable an empty access control list. Nobody is able to access from SSH the switch. So how can we remediate this situation? So here also, like SSH server is enabled per default on the VRF management. Also REST API, so what we call HTTPS with white, is enabled per default on the VRF management. So if the switch comes with the default settings, you will be able to send a patch command, so it's for with white here, to modify this attribute SSH server allow list to false, enable to false. So this will disable the features and this will give you back access to the switch. So I've given also the curl details that you can use to get directly access to this attribute. Also, as I said, these features is fully configurable. So not only you can enable or disable features, but you can also specify the allowed IP address. So with the SSH server allow list IP, here we can see, here I configure the 1020.00/16 from REST API. What about the best practice for the feature? So when you modify, so the SSH server list has been enabled, and you need to either delete some entries or add some entries. So here it's more recommended to disable the features. So to type no enable, then make your modification, and at the end make an enabled. Why? Because otherwise, if you keep it enabled, each time you're doing one modification, it will reset your SSH connection. So it's not very comfortable. So it's better to disable and then re-enable it, more efficient. Also make sure the list is not empty. So now we have this new warning message in 10.12.1000, which should keep you really aware that the SSH server list is empty before enabling the feature. Avoid duplicating or overlapping entries if you want to optimize again this and avoid this limit of the 20 entries. If never this maximum was reached, there is a message that you can see which is displayed as the maximum entries is already configured. But to be honest, 20 entries for this kind of access control list should be more than enough. Now, interesting point. So we saw initially in the second slide that before 10.12, there was some features, which is a control plane access control list, which was able as well to secure, so to filter the SSH connection to the switch. So what happens if both features are enabled at the same time in parallel? So if, I don't know, we permit 10.0.0/24 in the SSH server list, but we deny the 10.0.0/24 in the control plane access list. So what will happen from this source IP address? So the rule is that the control plane access list has a preemption. So in this case, if it is denied in the control plane access control list, this SSH server will be denied even if it's allowed in the SSH server allow list. So make sure that if you are using the SSH server allow list as well, you don't control the TCP port 22, so the SSH traffic to the switch from the control plane access list. About the troubleshooting, so maybe one of the most common commands that you're going to use is a show SSH server all VRF. So you will see that if it's apply on one VRF, here I have two VRF, I have the VRF management and the VRF default. So I can see the yellow list is exactly the same and it's apply on both of them. You can debug with the debug SSH utils all command. You can see what happens when you enable and disable the features. So as I explained, when you enable the features, first it's killing the active sessions and it's restarting the SSH daemon. Now, if we disable it, that's why when you modify the access control list, we prefer we disable it. It will reload the SSH daemon to run the new file, the new configuration file, definitely, but it's not killing the SSH session. So what about this file? So yes, so you know, as you probably know, we are able also to enter the kernel, so the Linux kernel of the operating system of Aruba OS-CX switch with the start shell command. And we can see how this feature, so SSH server role list, is populating basically the sshd underscore config file. So it's a config file for the SSH daemon that is run when you restart the SSH daemon. Here there is some attributes which are interesting, which is the max hosts twice attribute. If it is set to 0 in the configuration file, it means the SSH server allow list has been enabled in the CLI. Yes, because otherwise it will be equal to what is configured in the CLI. If it's not configured in the CLI, it's 6 per default. It's max host twice, and it can go from 1 to 10. So 0 means SSH server allow list enabled. And if it is enabled, if you go at the bottom of the configuration file, you will see here the allow list entries. So it's access control list which have been configured. And the max authentication twice, which is configured by the CLI, will appear here. The 6 will appear in the allow list entries section. Now, another situation, I said SSH server allow every incoming connection. We can see here the maximum authentication twice is equal to the default at the top, and the allow list entries is empty. So it's empty in the SSH config file, but it doesn't mean it is empty in the CLI. So it can still be present in the CLI, as I showed before. SSH of all of these features can be disabled, but you have again, your access control list. It can be populated if it was already configured before. So we're not losing the IPv4 and IPv6 entries, just the feature is disabled. But in the SSH config file, it will look as empty, even if it can exist. Now, SSH server denies any incoming connection. We are in the situation with a 0 in max authentication twice, that the feature is enabled. But here, yes, this is when it's enabled, normally it should show the IPv4, IPv6 entries. So here there is nothing, so the allow list is fully empty. The the switch, our AOS switch, cannot accept any incoming SSH session. Now I'm going to present you a quick demo. So regarding the demo script, I will enable SSH server allow list features. I'm going to verify that if the source IP address is included in the list, yes, the SSH login is presented via the CLI. If the source IP is not part of the list, then SSH session is dropped. There is no SSH login presented. We're going to modify this allow list. So first we disable it, we add the IP address that we want to be allowed, and we enable it, and we'll see what happens if we test with this from the new allowed server. So let's jump to the demo now. The demonstration for the SSH server allow list. So I'm going to try to access 6300 series switches from my Linux servers infra services 1. So the IP address of the switch is 10.5.10.107.0. So the password is prompted. I enter the password, and so it's accepted. If I check the different session, I should find from the client IP 10.5.0.21 the incoming SSH connection. So if we look at the different configuration for the SSH server, we can see if the SSH server allow list is enabled and the different IPv4 and IPv6 entries. We have also the command show SSH servers allow list. Again, same type of information, so extracted from all the SSH servers general configuration that it's enabled, and 10.5.0.21 is there, therefore it explains why the SSH server is successful. So now let's just activate the event login on the terminal, and I will try to access the same switch from 10.5.0.22, which is another server's services too. So same switch IP address. So here you see I don't even get the command prompt for the username, and it's quite clear that the permission is denied for the port 22. If I look at the CLI of the switch, I got an event here, so that the SSH server from 10.5.0.22, it is a server number 2, is denied by the feature SSH server allow list. Okay, so now, as I said, we're going to modify this SSH server allow list to allow the second servers. So we enter in configuration mode, SSH servers, allow lists commands, and remember, so I can show you what is configured, we show and current. We have the two IPv4 and IPv6 address and enable. So we'll first start to disable, and I will add my second servers with end with 22. And here at the end, one I could delete, I could remove, I could add more. Let's add another one, for example, and I will enable at the end. And here you will see that SSH server. So this is what we saw during the presentation. The daemon is retested, but also when you enable, the active SSH session as will be restarted if I really enable it by pressing yes and enter. So yes, so now it's closed and with the 10.50.22 address. So let's have a try from the server 2. So I connect my switch. So this time I get the prompt. Okay, so I get access to the switch, so I can see the details. Show SSH server session all VRF 10.50.22 is now allowed, and we have this SSH server order list configuration. So this is the end of the demonstration. Okay, so for this feature SSH server order list, we can find some detailed information about the features, how to configure it in the security guide, and as well in the CLI reference guide. So these two guides you can access from the public resources, which is on asp.arubanetworks.com, where you can also find all other type of configuration guide for the other features. With that, it's the end of the feature presentation SSH server list, which is coming with AOS-CX 10.12. And I just thank you now for attending this presentation.